There are actually several ways that you can deploy the Cisco Nexus 1000v. However, I cannot express in words alone my extreme antipathy for the Nexus 1000v Java installer. I hate that thing. The installation method that I'm going to present here is more manual for sure. However, it is far less problematic. I can't even tell you how many times I have destroyed my entire VMware environment and had to rebuild it because of that Java installer. So I'm definitely not going to use that. Now, before we install the Cisco Nexus 1000v, we need to set things up and get it ready. We're going to select our host. Again, we're in vCenter here. We're going to select Configuration and Networking. Now, this is the networking of ESXi and vCenter. We've got port groups, we've got a virtual switch, and we've got physical adapters. And tying all of those together is what allows the virtual machines to talk to the real network. Or in our case, these physical adapters are actually virtual adapters within VMWorkstation. And so they allow the virtual machines to talk to our host machine, which in my case is Windows 7. So what we're going to do is click Add Networking, and we're going to create a virtual machine network. We're simply going to add it to vSwitch 0. The network label, I'm going to name it VSM_MGT. The VLAN is not necessary. And finish. And now we have the VSM MGT virtual machine port group installed. Now we are ready to deploy the Nexus 1000v. So I'm going to select File and Deploy OVF Template. This time I'm going to browse to the VSM installer. Let's go back and look at that. This is my Nexus 1000v folder. I'm going to select VSM and install, and then this file right here. I'm not sure what this 1010 up above is, but this is the one I want. So I select that and next, next, accept, next, give it a name, Nexus VSM, next. Configuration, there are three options. I'm going to select manually configure the Nexus 1000v. Again, far less problematic than the Java installer. Next, I'm going to select thin provision to use less disk space. Now this is very important. The management network, which represents the management interface of the Nexus 1000v VSM, that's what I use to SSH to the VSM, and it's also the layer 3 interface that is used to communicate with vCenter. So it's very important. And I'm going to map this to the VSM MGT port group. The other two, it just doesn't matter. We're not using those anyway. Next, I can skip this because I'm going to set all of this stuff up manually in the CLI. Next, power on after deployment, and finish. So this is now deploying our Nexus 1000v. It goes very quick. And once it is done, I'm going to select it and go to the console. Now, it actually does take a few minutes for the Nexus 1000v to boot up, so I'm going to pause the recording. So the Nexus 1000v is booted up, and it's asking me to enter a password for admin. Now, the requirements for the password for admin are pretty strict, so you'll find that you might have to try a few times before it will accept your password. There we go. It accepted my password. It asks if I want to use the standalone primary or secondary role for this VSM. I only have one ESXi host in my environment, so I'm going to select standalone. If you wanted to have multiple ESXi hosts and you wanted to run redundant VSMs on those hosts, that's when you would deploy a primary and a secondary. But this is only a lab. I'm not in a production data center environment. I don't need the redundancy. I'm just going to select standalone. Enter the domain. 1 is perfectly fine. And it's going to walk us through a series of options. Would you like to enter the basic configuration dialog? Yes. Create another login account? No. SNMP? No. Read-write SNMP? No. Enter the switch name, Nexus 1000v. Continue with out-of-band management. Yes, management IP address. Here we go. 10.10.10.21. The net mask 255.255.255.0. Again, this is in the same subnet as the ESXi host and the vCenter server. Configure the default gateway. Yes. 10.10.10.1. Again, that is my host virtual adapter on my Windows workstation. Configure advanced IP options. No. Enable Telnet. No. Enable SSH. Yes. RSA is perfectly fine. 1024 for the key is good. HTTP server, yes. NTP server, no. Vim feature, do you want to configure? No. Configure SVS domain parameters. Yes. L3 is good. Layer 3 mode as opposed to Layer 2 mode is what we just selected there. Cisco now recommends Layer 3 mode for the installation of the Nexus 1000v. That recently changed. It used to be Layer 2, but now you can see that the default option is Layer 3. Would you like to edit? Nope, we're happy with it. Use this configuration, yes. And it applies all of the configuration, and off we go. Now, I have no interest in using this very rudimentary console to administer the Nexus 1000v. Instead, I'm going to use Secure CRT. If you don't have Secure CRT, you can definitely use PuTTY, which is a free terminal emulator for SSH. So I've already got it set up here. Nexus 1000v, enter. Accept and save, and there we go. Now, Secure CRT or even PuTTY are so much nicer to use the command line interface. All right, the next step is to download the plugin for the Nexus 1000v. So I am going to HTTPS to the management IP address that we configured on the Nexus 1000v, 10.10.10.21. Proceed anyway. And you can see the second major bullet point in the list here, Cisco Nexus 1000v extension, and there's the XML file right there. Now, a little quirk, at least in Chrome, is if I click on it, it thinks I'm just opening a web page. Well, that's not what I want. What I actually want is to download that XML file. So I'm going to right-click and select Download. I actually have a download manager, so that's what it's going to use. And I'm going to save this. For now, I think I'm just going to save it at the root of C, start download, and there we go. Now, it is important to note that this particular XML file is tied to this unique instance of the Cisco Nexus 1000v. If I were to download a different XML file from a different installation of the Nexus 1000v, it would not work. I must use this very XML file in order for everything to work. Okay, so now that I've downloaded that XML file, I'm going to go back to my vSphere client, and I'm going to select the Plugins pull-down menu and Manage Plugins. Now, if I right-click here and select New Plugin, I can click Browse and go to that XML file that I downloaded. If I go to the root of C, I can see that that was modified today. which is a good thing. I select it and register plugin, ignore, OK, and the plugin has been installed. Very good.